Hello and welcome to South Africa on 99.94 Cricket Every Day. I'm Neil Manthorpe. My co-host is Lungani Zama. South Africa on 99.94 is your new home for South African content, and we'll be dropping into your podcast feed and YouTube on the 99.94 app several times every week, provided that Zams and I can coordinate our schedules. So please rate, review and subscribe. Thanks for joining Cricket's Conversation today. We're going to be talking about South Africa's national team's coaching situation with Mark Boucher set to leave after the T20 World Cup. It was, Sams and I have touched on this subject in days and weeks gone by. It was a bombshell. Nobody expected him to announce that he would be leaving after the T20 World Cup. His contract was to have extended to the 50-over World Cup in India. And you know, there's an old saying, I don't know where I first heard it, that in all sport, actually, when a coach wobbles, the team wobbles with him or her. And I don't know that, Boucher is wobbling, but he's on his way out. And I just wonder that I've got lots of questions. We're going to talk about his potential successor as well, Sams. But maybe before we get into the effect that his unexpected and premature resignation has had on the team. First of all, what's your perception of the coach that he has become in the time that he's been with the national team? Because, I won't give my view just yet. But what have you heard?
The coach that he's become, I think,
as opposed to the man who took the job.
Yeah, I think coaching through COVID, much like the rest of the world will tell you that working through COVID and living through COVID does definitely change people. And obviously South African cricket had this additional layer through the pandemic where we're dealing with some pretty meaty issues about South African cricket and its past and the way that it's been handled and the way that it's made certain players feel. So I think, if anything, he takes away from this experience more from his off-field experiences and his off-field learnings than anything that was accomplished on the field. And there were things that were accomplished on the field, but I think when you have so much time, an unusual amount of time for cricketers, for sure, to sort of reflect and address, certain things that you were part of that maybe even you were not aware of, you would hope that it's made him a more rounded South African who's appreciative of the opportunities that he got, and the opportunities that he still gets, and has passed that on. I think, from what I've heard from players, there were a lot of deep and meaningful conversations around just how sacred it is to put on the Proteas jersey, and became a lot softer. I think the Boucher, the player that a lot of people got to know and respect for what he did behind the stumps and with bat in hand, was dogged, determined, by any means necessary, take a bullet for your country. The coach, and certainly the coach who leaves, is somebody who's a lot more considered. I've certainly heard of events that have happened off the field that affected the team where he's been emotional and outwardly, publicly in front of the players, and even when they were saying goodbyes to certain team members, tears and things that you don't readily associate with such a gritty cricketer like Mark Boucher. So I think he's become a better South African, or a better man, and one who appreciates everything that the game has given him, because of this experience. And, wherever he takes that, and Mumbai Indians, there's a lot of South Africans who are going to be playing in the SA20. I think it's something that we'll pass on to every other player, that, you're lucky to do this. I've done it, and at the time I kind of took it for granted, but, not his injury obviously was was a massive wake-up call for all cricketers, and it's changed things and made the game a bit safer for those behind the stumps at all levels. And he was the unfortunate example there, but he's been the example elsewhere too, very publicly. And I think as he reflects and looks forward to the SA20 and far less scrutiny and pressure.
Inflexible and dogmatic, are I think the words that you were leaning towards, and I think that's changed quite significantly from what I've heard. Obviously, I don't spend time in the changing room. Um, just specifically, I mean, he like Graham Smith, but I think probably Boucher more would have been tainted by the allegations or the charges of racial bias. Both men found emphatically not guilty. But never mind what you and I thought about, and I think we have exactly the same opinion on whether the team should or should not have taken a knee at the last T20 World Cup. But Boucher's way of handling that, when he said to the team manager, or suggested to the team manager, Volvo, you speak to the black players and I'll speak to the white players. It does make you cringe. I mean, it's very clearly, a distinction based on racial lines. I mean, I couldn't help thinking if he'd said, I'll speak to the guys from the Eastern Cape because I get them, and you speak to the guys from up north. And what did you think? I mean, was that? I did wonder, and it shouldn't have been made public, I suppose. But it was interesting, wasn't it? It was. What did you make of that? Was that just Boucher being pragmatic and unapologetic?
I think after everything that had happened, it was just an incredibly clumsy thing to say. I mean, regardless of what it might have been thinking, it's just bizarre. I mean, after all the water that had gone under the transformation bridge, which he was so much a part of, to then say that I'll speak to the white players, you speak to the black players. It was almost as bad as that picture when they were just standing there and black players one side, white players one side. It speaks volumes of whatever team culture that you say you've built. If that's your answer, it begs the question: what have you actually learned then? And I think that's a stain that you don't erase, because after everything and you've been proven not guilty, people will just look at that and guess, well, it is what it is. You can say what you want, but actions do speak louder than words. And in that moment, that was a very poor action by Boucher.
It was. We'll talk more about Boucher and his potential successors as national coach in just a moment, but we'll take a short break and be back with you in a second or two.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
So Mark Boucher was known as, the Iron Man. He was the pit bull. He was the enforcer, whatever you like to call him. And when somebody needed to get under an opponent's skin, he was the man tasked with the job. And I have to say that he never objected. In fact, he would have been the first to volunteer. But I think he softened enormously. And let me be honest, when he took over, and indeed during his first year, you and I both interact with cricketers enough to not to have to, for them to express exactly how they feel about a teammate or a coach. I mean, they don't disguise their feelings. And I think it's fair to say, probably actually I'll go 99% fair to say that there was an enormous amount of skepticism and doubt amongst a significant number of players in that first year, and they had a picture of who Boucher was, and I'll be honest, they may well have been right. And I'm as surprised as anybody to say that that the way the team has come together and fought is as much of a reflection as the way he changed in the amount he learned in the subsequent 2 years.
Yeah, it was quite a period. It was quite a period for South African cricket, quite a period for him as well. And I think, like you say, he learnt and changed heavily. And a lot of the players obviously knew him from the Titans. There were considerations of how brutal he was at training and how driven he was, and how those who sort of shirked training or doing extra sessions, quickly fell down his pecking order. So there was a lot of skepticism about where South African cricket would go under him. But I think the one thing cricketers respect is if you can show the numbers that you put up because of your attitude, it takes away a lot of the fluff of the conversation, because I worked this hard because I only accomplished what I did because of how hard I worked. So I'm pushing you because I know what talent you have, and it's probably a lot more than mine. But then when you stop playing cricket, but you still got to get together as a team because there's other issues that you've got to deal with as a team, you start listening a lot more and you start talking a lot less as a coach, because you're speaking about conversations that you actually don't have a lot of expertise in. And I think he kind of looked around the room and realized that, cheapers, it probably was a lot simpler playing in the 90s and early 2000s for South Africa, because all you worried about was facing Shane Warne and Glenn McGrath. There are so many other societal challenges that the modern cricketer has, especially the modern South African cricketer, long before you get onto the field. So, yeah, I think it's been a period of time that has probably grown him immensely as a coach. To be, even as you coach in the IPL and you've got 7 different nationalities and 25 different personalities, you kind of become a chameleon, which in South Africa is crucial. But it's actually crucial everywhere else. That's why South Africans thrive, whatever they do in the world, in terms of whether it's medical or teaching or going to play for another country. You kind of slot in because we kind of have to do it on a daily basis. We've got to get along. And he would have learned, if he'd forgotten, he definitely would have learned a lot from the modern team that he was surrounded by.
Well, as you know, but some of our listeners and viewers might not know, I ghost wrote his biography, and I have to say that I would have been the last person to suggest that he was capable of subtlety and nuance, not because he wasn't capable of it, but just because he was totally disinterested in it. So throughout his playing career, and I don't think he was necessarily interested in the subtlety and nuance, and when he took the job, and so that's what has really surprised me and pleased me to see that he hasn't just taken that hard ass approach to everything. Well, you've got to do, you put in the hard yards, don't stop complaining, get on with it. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. He's realized that you occasionally need to change your approach.
I actually chatted to one of the players, and the comparison that we landed on was Roy Keane, the pundit, who sits often these days with Mika Richards, who
yes,
and Roy Keane, old school, hard as nails, despises anyone who celebrates mediocrity or half-asses, absolutely despises it. And there's a lot of Boucher in that. And Mika Richards is just looking at you, he'll, roar in laughter, and he's just this bubble of energy. And they shouldn't get along because one is a Man United legend and the other one was a Man City star. Everything says they shouldn't. Take it further. One's English and the other's Irish. One's black, one's white. But their chemistry has allowed a softer side of Roy Keane to come out where occasionally he even smiles and he cracks jokes. And Mika Richards says things to him that you can imagine young players who grew up in Roy Keane's change room at Manchester United says, you would never say that to Roy Keane, the player. But Roy Keane, the pundit, takes it from Mika Richards. They've even gone on road trips. So, evolution is a wonderful thing because as you grow and you realize that you've got to adapt to stay relevant, you do. And there's often young ones who, in every possible sense, you shouldn't get along with. You do. And you find yourself, once you open yourself up to the opportunity to enjoy and have a laugh and actually not take yourself so seriously, but still take the job seriously, which obviously Keane does and of course Boucher does. But you allow yourself to be vulnerable to, to being taken the mickey out of. And I think that was a very good comparison because I see a lot of that in Boucher, and I'm sure a guy like Shamsi and a guy like, Kagiso Rabada, who, call it as they see it, but they like to be funny and they dress a certain way, which kind of things that Boucher probably just wouldn't do. But, that's not your real job. So what you dress like off the field actually doesn't matter as long as you do your job on the field. But because you can sort of laugh at each other and how completely different you are, it brings you more and more together as a team.
Okay, time for our final break in this podcast. After the break, we'll talk about we don't have as long as I had planned, but we'll talk about Mark Boucher's potential replacements, and it's something that we'll expand on in future episodes. So I won't apologise for it being cut too short.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
Right, we're back, and Mark Boucher has got a month left in the job after the T20 World Cup. He will no longer be National Proteas men's coach, as I just said at the end of the last section, it's something that we will no doubt be talking about in several podcasts. So let's just sort of touch on a few a few candidates. Malibongwe Maketa is my favourite. I don't understand how he's dropped off the scene. I do not understand. He was SAA coach. He was assistant coach to Otis Gibson, to the national team. It seemed to me that he was the natural successor, and he seems to have disappeared. I mean, he's the SAA coach at the moment, but they don't play any cricket, so I don't know what he's doing. There are some other candidates. Anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked Mali, and I thought he was the natural successor at the time, and I think a lot of people did, which is why Boucher was a surprise at the time. The problem is, like you say, he's kind of fallen off because the team that he's in charge of doesn't play much cricket these days, and it's weird. Much like a player needs to be in form and sort of be, in front of you and visible. Coaches are a bit the same when these gigs come up. They kind of look and say, "What have you done lately?" And he's not done a lot lately, and that's not his fault. But he would be a solid option. But it's hard to judge a man who hasn't led teams to play much cricket of late.
Excellent domestic record, of course, with the Warriors. What are they called now? Eastern Province again, are they?
Yeah. Eastern Cape. Yeah.
Eastern Cape. Yeah,
We know where
okay,
we know where they
well,
are. We don't know the
you know, he
names. We
had
know where they are.
terrific. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So a couple of other options, and again, I think that Mandla Mashimbi has also got an excellent record. I mean, he's been coaching for 10 years. He played the game. He played 50 first class games and 50 ODIs, or 48 and 49, I think. So he's got the playing credentials. He's at the Titans. And as like I said, he's been coaching 10 years. He's 41, which some people might say is a bit young, but you know, but he's not young in coaching years. And obviously there's Wandile Guavo as well, who coaches the Warriors, but he's 33. He's the youngest coach in the history of cricket. So but again, I mean, you know, he sort of met with instant success. They're also options. If the new majority independent board is persuaded by gravitas and international playing experience, then I suppose we've got, you know, if they want somebody who's got international cricket under the belt, then Robbie Peterson and Alan Donald even.
I will throw one name that you haven't mentioned, who worked with the players a couple of years ago, and every single one of them was pleasantly surprised at just how much they enjoyed it. And actually, Quinton de Kock was interim captain at the time because Faf wasn't there. Quinton said, it's a pity that he's leaving, because every single one of us just felt like we grew, and we just felt like this relationship was beginning. And that was Lance Klusner. And Quinny even said he was jealous because there were conversations that he would have with black players in Zulu, and Quinny wanted to be part of them, but couldn't be because he didn't understand the language, and he actually wanted to learn it so that he could give his team talks in Zulu. And he's got international experience. He's got South African playing experience. He's coached. You know, he's there, and he's always been there. And you know what you get with him. He's been a hero to many of these guys. He's got an SA20 gig now, but you know, that's another option.
Fascinating. And I suspect that we won't just do one podcast in future as the hunt goes on for South Africa's national men's head coach continues. But yeah, I suspect we'll do a couple. But for now, Zams, I am delighted to see that your lights are on, because the last 3 podcasts we've done, there's been power cuts in Durban, and you've been in the dark.
They go off in exactly 28 minutes. So thanks for that, Manners.
Okay, well, get the pasta on quickly.
I will chat to you soon.
Will do.